Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hi everyone, this is Mallika Pathak from Miranda House, University of Delhi, continuing with the course on gaseous state for the students of BSc Honours Chemistry and BSc with Chemistry. This is Module 3, Lecture 2 of the series. The academic expert of the course is Dr. Amrita T. Sheikh, and the recording is being done under the DTH Swayam Prabha project of the MHRD New Delhi. Now, let's try and recall what we studied in the previous lecture. So, in the previous lecture, we talked about distribution of molecular speed. We looked at the Boltzmann distribution law. We talked about most probable speed, average speed, root mean square speed, and tried and derived their relationship. We also studied the effect of temperature and pressure on the three speeds, the root mean square speed, the most probable speed, and the average speed. So, continuing with this theme on collision and molecular speed, today we are going to talk about collision frequency or collision number, try and derive it. We will see what is the effect of temperature and pressure on the mean free path and the molecular collisions. We will also talk about the viscosity of gases. This will be followed by a discussion on law of equipartition of energy, degrees of freedom, heat capacities. So let's start with today's e-lecture. Molecular collisions. So we are talking about molecular collisions today. Now, kinetic theory of gases helps us to determine the collision frequency between the gaseous molecules. The theory tells us that the molecules are moving constantly in random motion. They are colliding with each other. In fact, they are colliding at the rate of billion collisions per second. But the predicted velocities, the velocities that we have calculated using the kinetic theory of gases, are much smaller than the experimental observation. Now, this inconsistency, this variation between the experimental observation and the predicted velocities can be accounted by the fact that these molecules are getting drifted away from their normal path due to the mutual collision among themselves. So, in this section today, we will be studying about the relations of collision frequency and mean free path. We will try and derive the relations. These both collision frequency and mean free path are very important when we try and describe the transport properties of a gas. And while doing the study of these collisions, we will take a model system of hard sphere gas of single phase molecules and assume them to be non-interacting hard spheres with diameter d. So the first term under study is collision diameter. Now let us assume that these are the two colliding molecules. Now when two molecules of a gas approach each other, so these are the two molecules and they are approaching each other. So when two molecules of a gas approach each other, they cannot come closer beyond a certain distance. Why? Because there is going to be mutual repulsion. So these are the two colliding molecules and they're coming closer to each other, but they cannot come closer beyond a certain distance because of the mutual repulsion. Now, when they are at this distance, the distance of closest approach, this is called. And now the distance between the centers is called as collision diameter. So I'm repeating, the definition will be the closest distance between the center of two colliding molecules. The closest distance between the center of two colliding molecules is termed as collision diameter and is represented by the symbol sigma. Now, what do we mean by distance of closest approach? It means that beyond this, they will start repelling each other. So this is the limit of the molecules to which they can come closer. Beyond this, they will start repelling each other. And what is collision diameter? It is the distance between the center of two colliding molecules. This is the distance of closest approach. Now the next term that we are going to talk about is collision cross section. Now if I assume that there are two identical molecules of diameter sigma and they will just touch each other when the distance separating their centers is sigma. So this molecule, let us assume that this is the molecule under study and it is passing through a tube. Now only those molecules will touch each other, this molecule, whose center is at a distance of sigma from the center of this molecule. So this molecule is passing and all those molecules whose center is at a distance of sigma from this center will be touching each other, right? So this moving molecule will collide with other molecules whose center come within a distance of sigma from its center. This quantity, pi sigma square, called as collision cross section, is for the rigid sphere molecules. And it is obvious that the collision cross section is an area of imaginary sphere of radius sigma around the molecule within which the center of another molecule cannot penetrate. I am repeating, what is it? It is the area of an imaginary sphere of radius sigma around the molecule within which the center of another molecule cannot penetrate. So if I assume that this is the molecule under study, then the volume, then the area of imaginary sphere, so this volume, so this is a molecule which is going, so all this area within which the center of another molecule cannot penetrate is called as the collision cross section and is represented by the symbol pi sigma square. Collision frequency or collision number and its derivation. So what is collision frequency? It is the rate of collisions, or it is the average number of collisions suffered by a single molecule per unit time per unit volume of a gas. I am repeating. It is the average number of collisions suffered by a single molecule per unit time per unit volume of a gas, and it is represented by Z1. Now to understand this, let us take a look at this diagram. So we have a container which contains gas. Now within this you have one gas, so all the molecules of the gas are going to be identical with one another. Now for our understanding, let us name these molecules. So one molecule which we want to study, let us name it as 1, and all the other molecules, so we have, let's say, n molecules, then the n minus 1 molecules are taken as 2. Now supposing that we assume that only molecule 1 is moving and all the other molecules are stationary. They are stationary and they are present within the container at all different positions. Now molecule 1 is moving and it should ultimately collide with at least one molecule. Now which molecules will collide? Only those molecules whose center is at a distance of sigma from the center of molecule 1. So this molecule will sweep an area equivalent to this dotted blue cylinder. And what is this area? This is equal to pi sigma square. And all those molecules which lie within this cylinder will be swept by molecule 1. So there are going to be multiple misses, or there are going to be multiple molecules which are going to be outside this cylinder. But ultimately, there is going to be at least one molecule with which my molecule 1 collides. And when it does collide, its direction of motion will change, and also the 2 will displace from its position. Now, as there was only one particle which was moving, the mean number of stationary particles with center inside the collision tube per unit volume is what? N minus 1 by V. Because n is a very large number, we can say n by V, which is equal to n star. So here n star is the number of molecules per unit time, or it is the number density of molecules in the gas. Now if the velocity of my molecule was u bar, then the average distance travelled by my molecule 1 in 1 second is u bar. Also the one moving molecule travelling through the gas sweeps out a cross-sectional area of pi sigma square. We've already talked about it. this molecule 1 will sweep out a cross-sectional area of pi sigma square when it is moving. Therefore, the volume which has been swept by this molecule per unit time will be equal to volume is equal to area into distance traveled. Now, distance traveled is u bar, area swept is pi sigma square, so volume is equal to pi sigma square into u bar. Now, the number of molecules in that cylinder which have been swept by molecule 1 per second will be given by what? V into n star. So V, we know that it is equal to pi sigma square into u bar. That will be multiplied by n star, and you will get the number of molecules that have been swept by molecule 1 in 1 second. So the number of collisions made by a single molecule per second per unit volume, or the collision frequency Z1 that we were talking about, is equal to pi sigma square u bar into n star. Is that okay? Now, we have collision frequency. This collision frequency Z1 is actually the collision frequency which we have found out assuming that only one molecule is moving and the others are all stationary. Now, that doesn't normally happen. All the molecules are moving. All the molecules are moving, all of them are colliding with each other, and the collisions are all random in nature. Now, what kind of collisions can take place? You can have a head-on collision, you can just have a slip-by collision, or you can have a collision in which the molecules collide and then move at right angles away from each other. So if you have a head-on collision, the relative velocity, we already know that, we have already studied in 11th standard, will be coming out to be 2 u bar. If we have a slip-by collision when they are moving in the same direction, then u relative will be equal to 0 because u bar minus u bar 0. Or if they collide and then move at right angles away from each other, then it will come out to be root 2 u bar. Is that okay? So if this is your relative velocity, these are the three kinds of relative velocity. Which is the most common velocity that is going to be taking place? It's going to be a very possible, the relative motion of molecules with respect to each other is going to be most probably that last one. So, if that is the case, then Z1 can be written as root 2 pi sigma square u bar into n star, where u bar is equal to what? Root 8 kt by pi mu. We've already talked about it. We've talked about average velocity in detail in the previous EG lecture. So Z1 is equal to root 2 pi sigma square u bar into n star, where u bar is equal to what? Root 8 kt by pi mu, where mu is the reduced mass and k is the Boltzmann constant. Now if I substitute the value of u bar into Z1, we will get Z1 is equal to root 2 pi sigma square root 8 kt by pi mu into n star. Now this was a collision where one molecule is moving, all the others are stationary, right? But if I am talking about bimolecular collisions, where one collides with one collides with two, then the number of bimolecular collisions per unit volume, per unit time will be given by 1 by 2 into Z1 into n star. So we know the value of our Z1, we just multiply it by 1 by 2 into n star and we will get the value of Z11. But why is there a multiplication of 1 by 2? This multiplication by a factor of 1 by 2 is important so that no collision is counted twice. But please understand why are we saying it. So you have two molecules. This is one molecule and this is another molecule. They both collide. So if I am counting about this molecule, I am saying 1 collides with 2. And if I am counting from this side, I am saying 2 collides with 1. But it's actually one collision. 1 collides with 2 or 2 collide with 1. It's just one collision. So to ensure that no collision has been counted twice, we multiply by a factor of 1 by 2. I must emphasize here that Z1 was a collision frequency when only one molecule was moving and all the others were stationary. It was inside a container which had identical gas molecules. Z11, all the molecules are moving, but they are still identical molecules of a single gas, right? So Z11 becomes 1 by root 2 pi sigma square root 8 kt upon pi mu into n star square. Now, suppose you have collisions involving two unlike molecules. That means, let's say you take gas A and gas B and mix them together in a container. Now you will have unlike gas molecules. Then the collision frequency that we are going to talk about is Z12. It is the number of collisions taking place between molecules of 1 and 2 per unit volume per unit time. So Z12 will become 1 by root 2 pi sigma 12 square root 8 kt on pi mu into N1 into N2, where N1 and N2 are the number of molecules per unit volume of the two type of molecules, and sigma 12 is the average diameter of the two molecules, and mu is the reduced mass. So sigma 12 is what? Sigma 1 plus sigma 2 by 2, and what is 1 by mu? 1 upon m1 plus 1 upon m2. So Z12 is equal to 1 by root 2 pi sigma 12 square root 8 kt upon pi mu into N1 into N2. So this was with unlike molecules and this was with like molecules. Now let's talk about mean free path. So what is a mean free path? It is the average distance traveled by a molecule between two successive collisions. So there is one collision which is taking place here. There's another collision which is taking place here. The distance which has been traveled by a molecule between these two successive collisions is called as mean free path. It is represented by the symbol lambda. So what is lambda? Lambda is equal to average distance traveled by a molecule per unit time upon number of collisions made by a single molecule per unit time. I'm repeating, lambda is equal to average distance traveled by a molecule per unit time upon number of collisions made by a single molecule per unit time. So this can also be written as lambda is equal to average velocity of a molecule upon number of collisions per second. So we have lambda is equal to u bar upon z1. We know u bar. We know what is z1, root 2 pi sigma square u bar into n star. So u bar get cancelled out, and what are we left with? Lambda is equal to 1 upon root 2 pi sigma square n star. But why are we talking about the mean free path or the average free path? Because the free paths of all the molecules at the same instant and for a particular molecule at different instants are not equal and cannot be equal. So we talk about average or a mean free path, and this average or a mean free path is the distance traveled by a molecule between two successive collisions. Now what is mean collision time? It is the reciprocal of collision frequency Z1. Now we know that time is equal to distance upon speed, so tau is equal to lambda by u bar. This is tau. Tau is the mean collision time. So this becomes equal to 1 upon root 2 pi sigma square u bar into n star. If I put in the terms, we will get under root pi mu 16 kt into 1 upon pi sigma square n star. Now comes number density of molecules. It is the number of molecules per unit volume. We have already talked about it. We have used this for deriving our relation for collision frequency. But to understand it better, let's use the ideal gas equation. Now, ideal gas equation is PV is equal to nRT. So R can be written as Boltzmann constant into Avogadro number. So N into K into Na into T. So P upon Kt can be written as N into Na by V, which is equal to N upon Na into Na by V. So P upon Kt is actually equal to N by V, which is equal to N star. So wherever we have to use N star, the number density, we can substitute P upon Kt. Is that okay? So N star is equal to P upon Kt from the ideal gas equation. Now let us look at the effect of temperature and pressure on mean free path and molecular collision. But before we talk about mean free path and molecular collisions, let us look at the dependence of number density N star on pressure and temperature. Now we know that N star is equal to P upon Kt, but let's try and derive it again, although we've done just now. Now according to the ideal gas equation, PV is equal to nRT, where N is the number of moles. So this N can be written as N upon Na, that is number of molecules upon Avogadro number, into R into T. If I rearrange this, then we get P is equal to N upon V, R by Na into T. Now this R upon Na is equal to Boltzmann constant, so this can be written as P is equal to N by V into K into T. Therefore, N by V we know is equal to what? N star, that is the number density. So number density is equal to N prime by V is equal to P upon KT. We had already done this in the previous slide, but to understand the relationship I just wanted you to recall. So therefore N star is proportional to pressure and inversely to temperature in Kelvin. Now let's look at the dependence of U bar, which is the average velocity on temperature. Now we know that the average velocity or the average speed is equal to root 8 RT by pi m or root 8 KT by pi mu or pi m. Therefore U bar is directly proportional to under root 2, right? U bar is directly proportional to under root 2. Now using these two, the number density and the average velocity, let's look at the dependence of mean free path on the pressure and temperature. So for studying about the effect of pressure and temperature on the mean free path, let us recall the formula that we had. So lambda, the mean free path, is equal to U bar upon Z1, U bar upon root 2 pi sigma square U bar into N star. So this leads to 1 upon root 2 pi sigma square N star. Therefore lambda is inversely proportional to N star. Now we know that N star is proportional to P upon T. We've just found out that N star is equal to P upon KT. So N star is proportional to P upon T. Therefore lambda, which is inversely proportional to N star, is in fact directly proportional to temperature and inversely proportional to pressure. Therefore if pressure is kept constant, then lambda is directly proportional to temperature, and if temperature is held constant, then lambda is inversely proportional to pressure. Now we know that P is directly proportional to T at constant volume according to the Gay-Lussac's law. Therefore lambda will be proportional to constant, it will be equal to a constant at constant volume. Therefore, the effect of changing temperature or pressure on lambda, if the volume of the gas has been kept constant, will be null. There is no effect of changing temperature and pressure on lambda if volume of the gas has been kept constant. Just to summarize, what is the effect of pressure on mean free path? Let us just discuss them point-wise. So as the pressure increases, the mean free path will decrease, because with the increase in pressure, particle density increases and therefore particle would travel a shorter distance between collision. Also, as the particle size increases, the mean free path will decrease. This is because with the increase in size, the probability of collision also increases, thereby reducing the mean free path. Also, it must be remembered that since mean free path is inversely proportional to pressure, at low pressure, mean free path increases such that the molecule travels larger distances before colliding with each other. Now let's discuss the effect of pressure and temperature on molecular collision. Z1 is equal to root 2 pi sigma square U bar into N star. Therefore, this implies that Z1, the collision frequency, is proportional to U bar, the average velocity, into N star. Now, we know that N star is proportional to P by T and U bar is proportional to under root T. Therefore, if we combine the two, we will know that Z1 is proportional to root T into P by T, or Z1 is proportional to P upon root T. Thus, Z1, the collision frequency, is proportional to pressure when the temperature is held constant, and Z1 is proportional to root T when pressure is held constant. Now, if I want to see the effect of changing pressure or temperature, at constant volume, we must make use of Gay-Lussac's law. Now, Z1 is proportional to T upon root T using the Gay-Lussac's law. Therefore, Z1 is proportional to root T at constant volume. Similarly, Z1 is proportional to P upon root P using the Gay-Lussac's law. Therefore, it is proportional to root P at constant volume. Now, let's look at Z11. Z11 is equal to 1 by root 2 pi sigma square u bar into n star square, or Z1 is proportional to u bar into n star square. Now we know what is u bar, we know what is n star. So let's just put the values. So n star being equal to P upon kt, or is proportional to P upon t. U bar is proportional to root t. We will put this here and we will get that Z11 is proportional to under root t into P by t square. This means Z11 is proportional to P square upon T3 by 2. That means Z11 is directly proportional to the square of pressure provided the temperature is held constant, and Z11 is inversely proportional to temperature 3 by 2 provided the pressure is held constant. Now let's look at this condition under constant volume. Again we will apply the Gay-Lussac's law. So Z11 is proportional to P square upon T by 3 to T3 by 2. This means it is proportional to T square upon T3 by 2, which is proportional to T1 by 2 at constant volume. Similarly, for pressure, Z11 is proportional to P square upon T3 by 2. Putting it in terms of pressure, so P square upon P3 by 2, this is proportional to P1 by 2, keeping the volume constant. So, in other words, Z11 under the constant volume conditions is directly proportional to T1 by 2 or under root T, or P1 by 2 or under root P. Now let's look at some of the numericals. The first numerical is calculate the values of sigma, lambda, Z1 and Z11 for oxygen at 298.15 Kelvin at the pressure of 101.325 kilopascal, given that the van der Waals constant B is equal to 3.183 into 10 to the power minus 2 decimeter cube per mole. So the first thing when we want to solve such kind of numerical is, let's get the value of number density, and we know that number density n star is equal to P upon kt. So just substitute the value of P that has been given to you and K and T, and you will get the value of n star. Now we know that the van der Waals constant B is equal to 4Na into 4 by 3 in pi r cube. So you have the value, you can get the value of R. So R comes out to be 3B upon 16 pi Na to the power of 1 by 3. Substituting the value of B and Na and pi, and we get the value of R. Now we actually needed the value of sigma. So sigma is equal to 2R. So what do? We multiply the value of R with 2 and we get the value of sigma. Now what is average speed? We know that the average speed is equal to root 8 RT by pi m. We substitute the values of R, T, pi, and the m has to be substituted in the units of kg per mole. It has to be remembered whenever you are solving the numericals for average speed, most probable speed, root mean square speed. The molar mass that you will be taking will be in kg per mole, because the R that you are taking is 8.314 joules per Kelvin per mole. So you get U bar. Now what is mean free path? Mean free path lambda is equal to 1 upon root 2 pi sigma square n star. Just substitute the values of sigma and n star and you can get the value of lambda, right? Okay. Now what is collision frequency? You have Z1 and you have Z11. So Z1 is equal to root 2 pi sigma square U bar into n star. Substituting the values here of sigma, U bar, n star that we have calculated, we can get the value of Z1. Similarly, what is Z11? We know that 1 by 2 Z1 into n star is equal to Z11. We just take the value of Z1, multiply by 1 by 2 and n star, and you get the value of Z11. So very simple. The important thing while solving the numericals is that you keep the units together so that you know what you are doing. You cannot use CGS units at one place and SI units at another place. The units that you are using should be in the same order when you are working with the numericals. Now let's look at another numerical. Very simple. Determine the mean free path of argon molecules at STP knowing that the molecule's diameter is 0.4 nanometer. Now what is lambda? Lambda is equal to kT upon root 2 pi sigma square into P. So just substitute the values of K, temperature, sigma. This is given in nanometers, so you will convert it into meters. So, and the pressure. When you substitute, you get the lambda is equal to 5.2 into 10 to the power minus 8 meter or 52 nanometer. Similarly, another numerical, we have already done a similar numerical, but please try and solve it because numericals give you a better understanding of what you are dealing with. The numbers have a feeling to it. So if you start looking at numbers more and more, you get an understanding of what these numbers signify. So calculate lambda, Z1 and Z11 for oxygen at 298 Kelvin and 10 to the power minus 3 millimeters of mercury, given that the sigma is equal to 3.61 into 10 to the power minus 8 centimeter. First thing again we are going to do is get the value of n star, which is the number density, and it is equal to P upon kT. So just substitute the value of P. This is in millimeters of mercury, so you have to convert it into pascals, K and T, and you get the value of n star. Now, what is U bar? U bar is equal to under root 8 RT by pi m. It has to be reminded that m, the molar mass, has to be taken in kg per mole. So once you substitute, you again get the value of U bar. We had already done similar numerical just now. Now Z1 is equal to what? 2 root 2 pi sigma square U bar into n star. Just substitute the value of root 2 pi sigma U bar and n star, and you get the value of Z1. Once you get the value of Z1, then it's very simple to calculate the value of Z11 because Z11 is equal to 1 by 2 Z1 into n star. Again you get the value of Z11. And then what is lambda? Mean free path. The lambda, the mean free path, is equal to 1 upon root 2 pi sigma square into n star. Just substitute the value and you get the value of lambda. So very simple. You have to just remember the formula. The formula for n star is what? P upon kT. What is U bar? Under root 8 RT by pi m. What is Z1? Root 2 pi sigma square U bar into n star. What is Z11? 1 by 2 into Z1 into n star. What is lambda? 1 upon root 2 pi sigma square n star. So if you know the formulas or the equations and you know how to work with the units, then solving numericals is a cakewalk. You just have to have a feel of the numbers. It should be remembered that you are working with the numericals, then the units, the formula that you are using, all should be compatible. So the compatibility has to be ensured while solving a numerical. You cannot work with CGS units and then combine it with the SI units. You have to keep one set of units throughout. So there are people who say that you can work with CGS units and then finally convert and give your answer in SI units. But there are others who feel that the student should always work in SI units and get the answer in SI units. So there are two set of people and two set of teachers who expect different things. But the important thing that has to be kept is that these days SI units are what are important. So whether you work with CGS units from the beginning and convert it finally into SI, or whether you solve the whole numerical in SI units and give the answer in SI units, the only thing is that SI units answer should be given. So that is one important thing that you must remember while solving the numericals. Let's talk about viscosity of gases. Viscosity is a property that is possessed by both gases and liquids. The viscosity therefore measures the resistance of a fluid to the flow. The internal friction of molecules among themselves can be accounted for by viscosity. Now, what is the origin of viscosity in gases and liquids? Both are fluids, but they both have different origin of viscosity. In the case of gases, the viscous drag arises due to the transfer of momentum between the two adjacent layers. You know that in the gases, the molecules are continuously moving from one place to another. So if I imagine that the gases are moving in layers, then the molecules are moving from one layer to the other. And when they move from one layer to the other, they carry the momentum with them. So this transfer of momentum by the freely moving molecules in the gases is responsible for the viscous drag or the viscosity in the gases. Now, in the case of liquids, I'm imagining them as layers. So we're talking about layers of liquid. So in the case of liquids, there are strong attractive intermolecular forces between the layers of liquids. Here, the faster moving layer is getting retarded due to the strong attractive force from the slower moving layer. Therefore, it is these intermolecular forces which account for the viscous drag in liquids. Now, before we talk about viscosity in detail, let's talk about something which is important and is concerned with viscosity. That is the laminar flow. Now, this is part of the Newtonian fluids. So what happens is, if I imagine that there is a liquid or a fluid moving in a cylinder and it is consisting of series of parallel layers. This series of parallel layers, which is imagined to be, is called as a laminar flow. So the fluids can be imagined to be flowing in a series of parallel layers moving past each other. The layers just touching the sides of the tube, so the ones which are touching the sides of the tube are stationary, and the velocities of the adjacent layers increase towards the center. Now what it means is that the layer in the center is having the maximum velocity, whereas the layer which is towards the side of the tube is actually stationary. So there exists a velocity gradient as you move from the side towards the center. So there is a velocity gradient amongst the different layers of fluid, whether it is a liquid or whether it is a gas, and we are imagining this to be a laminar flow. Okay. So what happens in the case of gases? In the case of gases, the molecules are moving freely between the layers, with the result that a fraction of momentum of one layer is passed to the other. So when the molecules enter from a slower moving layer to a faster moving layer, they retard the momentum of the faster moving layer. Similarly, the momentum passed on by the faster moving molecules to the slower moving layer speeds up the slower moving molecular layer. So I'm repeating, what it is happening is, because in the case of gases, the molecules are free to move. So they are, if I imagine them to be moving in layers, then the molecules are moving from one layer to the other. So if they are moving from a slower moving layer to the faster moving layer, they retard the faster moving layer. And if they are moving from a faster moving layer to a slower moving layer, they increase the speed of the slower moving layer. So this is because of the transfer of momentum. The net effect of this is to decrease the relative rate of movement of one layer with respect to the other, and in order to maintain a uniform velocity gradient, one has to apply a force along the direction of movement of layer. This applied force is a measure of internal friction or viscosity of the fluid. I'm repeating, what are we trying to do? We are trying to maintain a uniform velocity gradient between the layers. Now for that we need to apply a force. So a force has to be applied to maintain a uniform velocity gradient in the direction of movement of a layer. And this force is a measure of the internal friction or the viscosity of the fluid. Now we must define coefficient of viscosity. We have talked about why the viscosity is arising in fluids, whether in gases or in liquid. But what is coefficient of viscosity? So we've just said that the force is required to maintain a uniform velocity gradient between the layers, and this leads us to the definition of coefficient of viscosity. Now, the tangential force which is required to maintain uniform velocity gradient between two layers will depend upon two factors. First, the area A or contact between the two adjacent layers, and second, the velocity gradient. I am repeating, velocity gradient is anything divided by distance. So velocity gradient is velocity divided by distance. So in this case we are taking it as du by dz. So this F is proportional to area of contact and is proportional to du by dz, which is the velocity gradient. So F is equal to eta A du by dz, where eta is the constant of proportionality which is applied to remove the proportionality sign. And this eta, this is a Greek symbol eta, is known as the coefficient of viscosity or sometimes as just viscosity. So how do we define coefficient of viscosity? Coefficient of viscosity is defined as the tangential force required to maintain a uniform velocity gradient of unity between two parallel layers, unit distance apart and having unit area of contact. What was our formula for tangential force? F is equal to eta A dV by dz. Now eta will be equal to F when A is equal to 1 and dV by dz is equal to 1. So if I have to define, what are we saying? That when dV by dz is unity and A is also unity, then eta will be equal to F, and this is the definition which has come out of it. So coefficient of viscosity is defined as the tangential force which is required to maintain a uniform velocity gradient of unity between two parallel layers, unit distance apart and having unit area of contact. It can also be defined as equal to a force required to move a layer of 1 meter square at a velocity of 1 meter per second with respect to another parallel layer 1 meter apart. Now what will be the units? So the units of eta will depend upon F, A and dV by dz. So F is what? Force, so it should have the units in SI as Newton. You have area, what will be the SI units of area? Meter square. What is the SI unit of dV by dz? Now V is what? Velocity, so it is meter per second. What is Z? It is distance, so meter. So what will be the units of dV by dz? It will be per second. So when you find out the units of eta, it will be what? Newton per meter square second. Or it can also be written as Pascal second, where Pascal is used to represent Newton per meter square. So Pascal second. Please understand there is no space between P and A. It is a short form for Pascal, so PA, and there is a space between second. So Pascal second. This is also equivalent to kg per meter per second. The CGS unit is dyne per centimeter square second or poise or gram per centimeter per second. Also, 1 SI unit is equal to 10 poise. To derive the relationship for viscosity, let us consider a gas flowing in parallel planes along the x direction with a velocity uz. These layers are separated by a distance lambda from each other. The layer adjacent to the x-axis has a velocity uz equal to 0, and it increases with increasing distance along the z-axis. If the velocity gradient is given by du by dz along the z-axis, then if the gradient is uniform, the average velocity of flow at any distance lambda above the layer pp prime is given by uz plus lambda du by dz. Similarly, the average velocity of flow at any distance lambda below the layer is given by uz minus lambda du by dz. The viscosity in case of a gas arises because of the transfer of momentum across the layers of the gas. But before we do that, we must assume some important things. First, that the flow velocity uz is very small as compared with the mean gas velocity u bar. Second, that the only molecules reaching p prime, the layer under study, are those which on an average have just made their last position at a distance lambda from the height z. Third, the number of molecules passing downwards or upwards through a unit area per unit time is equal to n star u bar by 6, where n star is the number of molecules per unit volume and u bar is the average speed of gaseous molecules. So just to re-emphasize, in order to derive an expression for the coefficient of viscosity, we have assumed that the number of molecules of a gas per unit volume is n star and the average velocity of the gas molecules is u bar. Since the motion of the gas molecules is completely random, it has been assumed that n star by 3 molecules are moving along each axis. Of these, n star by 3 molecules, half, that is n star by 6 molecules, would be moving in one direction, that is suppose along the z-axis, and n star by 6 in the opposite direction minus z-axis. So referring to the diagram that we have seen before and remembering that the viscosity in the gases is arising due to the transfer of momentum from one layer to the other, we are calculating the net momentum transferred per unit area per second to the layer which was under consideration p prime by the molecules from the adjacent layers separated by a distance lambda. So let's start with this. So in the plane p prime, the amount of horizontal momentum coming up through a unit area per unit time is m into 1 by 6 n star u bar into uz minus lambda du by dz, and the amount of horizontal momentum coming down is m into 1 by 6 n star u bar uz plus lambda du by dz, and the net downward flow of x momentum in unit time is mu downward minus mu upward is equal to 1 by 3 n star u bar m lambda du by dz. So we're just subtracting the two momentum, one coming up and the other coming down. So since the momentum transfer in unit time is numerically equal to the force, therefore the force acting in the x direction on a unit area of the layer is F is equal to 1 by 3 mn star u bar lambda du by dz. And if I compare this equation with the viscosity equation that we had seen, that is F is equal to eta A du by dz, with A is equal to unit area, we will get eta is equal to 1 by 3 mn star u bar lambda, or it can be written as 1 by 3 rho u bar lambda, where rho is the density of the medium. Now we know that u bar is the average velocity, so it is equal to root 8 kt by pi m, and lambda is equal to 1 upon root 2 pi sigma square n star. Let's substitute these two into our eta. So eta is equal to 1 by 3 mn star u bar lambda. Substituting the values of u bar and lambda here, we get 1 by 3 mn star under root 8 kt by pi m into 1 by root 2 pi sigma square n star. So eta comes out to be 2 under root mkt upon 3 pi to the power 3 by 2 sigma square, or 2 under root mRT upon 3 pi to the power 3 by 2 sigma square Avogadro's number. Now, let's try and see the effect of temperature and pressure on the coefficient of viscosity. Now, according to this equation, 2 under root mkt upon 3 pi 3 by 2, viscosity is independent of pressure for gases. Why? Because there is no term for pressure in this equation. This is contrary to one's expectation that with the increase in pressure, the resistance to the flow should increase and hence viscosity should increase. But experimentally, viscosity has been found to be independent of pressure. So this prediction that eta or the viscosity is independent of pressure turns out to be the biggest achievement of kinetic theory of gases. Also, when the pressure is low, the mean free path increases to the extent that it becomes comparable to the dimensions of the container. Therefore, molecules would be colliding more with the walls of the container than with each other. And under such circumstances, this equation, eta is equal to 1 by 3 mn star u bar lambda or 1 by 3 rho u bar lambda is not a valid equation. Now let's see the effect of temperature. Now eta is equal to 2 under root mkt upon 3 pi 3 by 2 sigma square. Now what does this equation show? It shows that eta should be independent of the density of gas, which is true, but it should be directly proportional to t to the power 1 by 2, because in the equation you have t to the power 1 by 2. But you find that it is somewhat a larger exponent, more like t to the power 0.7. This is due to the fact that the cross-sectional diameter becomes smaller at higher temperatures due to the increased penetration of the potential energy barrier by the gas molecules of higher velocities. In contrast with the viscosity of gases, the viscosity of the liquids decreases with the rise in temperature. We are going to discuss this part in the next presentation. Law of equipartition of energy. The law of equipartition of energy may be stated as if the energy of a molecule can be written in the form of sum of terms, each of which is proportional to the square of a velocity component or to the square of a position coordinate, then each of these square terms contributes half kT to the average energy. Now this is very important. Why? Because it tells you the way to calculate energy using the velocity component or the position coordinate. So I am repeating, it states that if the energy of a molecule can be written in the form of sum of terms, each of which is proportional to the square of a velocity component, then each of these square terms contribute half kT to the average energy. Therefore, the average translational energy of a molecule can be calculated with the help of classical law of equipartition of energy, that is epsilon trans is equal to half m u bar square, which is equal to half m u bar x square plus u bar y square plus u bar z square, which can also be written as sum of epsilon trans in the x direction, epsilon trans in the y direction, and epsilon trans in the z direction. Now, since each term in the above relation is proportional to the square of the velocity component, according to the law of equipartition of energy, each would contribute half kT to the total average translational energy. Moreover, since no direction is preferred direction, the velocities along the three axes are equally probable. That means u bar x square is equal to u bar y square is equal to u bar z square, and therefore epsilon trans in the x direction is equal to epsilon trans in the y direction, which is equal to epsilon trans in the z direction. Therefore, the total epsilon trans can be written as a sum of half kT plus half kT plus half kT, that is 3 by 2 kT. That is, the average translational kinetic energy possessed by the molecules in each component or per degree of freedom is equal to half kT per molecule or half RT per mole. Degree of freedom. Degree of freedom of a molecule may be defined as the independent number of parameters which must be specified to describe the state or position of the molecule. The degree of freedom may also be defined as the number of coordinates which are necessary to describe the position of a particle. To describe the motion of a particle moving along a line, only one coordinate, let us say x coordinate, is necessary to specify its position. The other coordinate y is known from the equation of the line. The particle is said to possess 1 degree of freedom. On the other hand, a particle moving on a two-dimensional plane, both x and y coordinates are essential to locate its position. The particle is said to have 2 degrees of freedom. When the particle moves unrestricted in a three-dimensional space, all the three coordinates x, y, and z are necessary in order to specify its position in space. The particle has 3 degrees of freedom. A spherical monoatomic gas molecule will have 3 degrees of freedom. A diatomic molecule will have 6 degrees of freedom, 3 coordinates for each atom. In general, a molecule containing n atoms has 3n degrees of freedom because 3n coordinates are required to locate the atoms in space. As the atoms in the molecule are not capable of moving independently of one another, therefore, the molecule executes translational motion as a whole. 3 coordinates are necessary to locate the position of the center of the mass of the molecule. The center of the mass of a molecule is the point where the whole mass can be assumed concentrated. So there remain 3n minus 3 degrees of freedom. These are attributed to other modes of internal motions, rotation and vibration, which are possessed by diatomic or polyatomic molecules. Translational degree of freedom. The translational motion of a molecule can be described by the motion of its center of mass, as we have talked about it. Since 3 coordinates are required to describe the position of center of mass, x, y, and z, thus all the monoatomic or polyatomic molecules have 3 translational degrees of freedom. They are possessed in the form of translational kinetic energy. So, epsilon trans can be written as equal to half m u bar square, which is equal to half m u bar x square plus u bar y square plus u bar z square, which can also be written as epsilon trans is equal to epsilon trans x, epsilon trans y plus epsilon trans z. Now, since each term in this relation is proportional to the square of the velocity component, therefore, according to the law of equipartition of energy, they would contribute half kT to the total average translational energy. So, epsilon trans becomes equal to half kT plus half kT plus half kT, which is equal to the 3 by 2 kT. Now, what is rotational degree of freedom? Rotational motion of any molecule can be attributed to its motion about the axis described by angular coordinates. In case of linear molecules, 2 angles, rotation about 2 axes mutually perpendicular to principal axis are needed to describe the orientation. Whereas in case of non-linear molecules, 3 angles, rotation about all the 3 axes are needed to describe its orientation. Therefore, the equation for the energy of rotation is given by epsilon rotation is equal to half Ix omega x square plus half Iy omega y square for linear molecule, and for a non-linear molecule it is half Ix omega x square plus half Iy omega y square plus half Iz omega z square, where omega x, omega y and omega z are angular velocities and Ix, Iy, Iz are moments of inertia about the x, y, and z axis respectively. Now, since each term in the above equations on the right hand side is proportional to the square of angular velocity, and therefore according to the law of equipartition of energy, each term would contribute half kT to the average rotational energy. Therefore, average rotational energy of a linear molecule will be given as half kT plus half kT, each half kT coming from half Ix omega x square plus half Ix omega y square. So this becomes equal to kT for a linear molecule, and for a non-linear molecule this will be half kT plus half kT plus half kT, so therefore it becomes equal to 3 by 2 kT. I am repeating, for the linear molecule it is kT, and for the non-linear molecule it is 3 by 2 kT. Now, what is vibrational degrees of freedom? A normal mode of vibration is defined as the molecular motion in which all the atoms in the molecules vibrate with the same frequency and all the atoms pass through their equilibrium positions simultaneously. Now, modes of vibration may result in the stretching and bending of molecular bonds. It must be emphasized here that there is no vibrational degree of freedom for an atom. So, if the vibrational motion is assumed to be harmonic, then the energy of each vibrational mode will be given as epsilon vibration is equal to kinetic energy plus potential energy. That means the vibrational motion is actually a contribution from kinetic energy as well as potential energy. So just think of your pendulum. You remember when you studied in 11th standard about the pendulum? So when it is at the mean position, equilibrium position, it has what? It has just kinetic energy. When it is at the extreme end, it has potential energy. And in the middle, it has both kinetic plus potential energy. So vibrational mode is actually a sum of kinetic energy plus potential energy. So epsilon vibration is equal to half mu dr by dt square plus half kf r minus r naught whole square, where mu is the reduced mass, kf is the force constant, and r naught is the equilibrium value of the coordinate r, and dr by dt is the change of internuclear distance with time. So epsilon vibration has become a sum of kinetic and potential energy. Kinetic energy coming from half mu dr by dt square, and potential energy half kf r minus r naught whole square. Now, in accordance with the law of equipartition of energy, since both terms are proportional either to the square of velocity or the coordinate, hence each term would contribute half kT to the average vibrational energy. Therefore, each vibrational mode would contribute half kT plus half kT equal to kT to the average vibrational energy. Now, for a polyatomic molecule which has n atoms, there are total of 3n degrees of freedom. Therefore, number of vibrational degrees of freedom can be calculated by subtracting the sum of rotational and translational degrees of freedom from 3n. Now, for linear molecules, there are 3 translational and 2 rotational degrees of freedom. Hence, vibrational degrees of freedom for linear molecules is going to be 3n minus 5. Similarly, for non-linear molecules, there are 3 translational and 3 rotational degrees of freedom. Hence, the vibrational degrees of freedom for non-linear molecules is going to be 3n minus 6. Now, each vibrational mode contributes on an average kT towards the total average energy. Therefore, for linear molecules, if I want to find out the value of epsilon vibration, it has to be equal to 3n minus 5 into kT. For non-linear molecules, it is going to be 3n minus 6 kT. Now, the total average energy per molecule is sum of contribution from translational, rotational, and vibrational energy. So, epsilon total is actually sum of translational, rotational, and vibrational energy. So, for linear molecule, epsilon total is equal to 3 by 2 kT coming from translational, kT coming from rotational, and 3n minus 5 kT coming from vibrational degrees of freedom. And this is per molecule. For non-linear molecule, it will be 3 by 2 kT coming from translational, 3 by 2 coming from rotational, and 3n minus 6 kT coming from vibrational degrees of freedom. And this is per molecule. For a monoatomic gas, epsilon total will be equal to 3 by 2 kT, as we know. Now, the total average energy stored by the molecules in 1 mole of the gas. This was per molecule. So now we are talking about 1 mole. So for linear molecule, the energy stored in 1 mole will be written as E total instead of epsilon total. So E total is equal to Avogadro number into epsilon total. So that becomes equal to 3 by 2 RT plus 3n minus 5 RT per mole for linear. For non-linear, epsilon total is replaced by E total. Therefore, it becomes Na epsilon total, which is equal to 3 by 2 RT plus 3 by 2 RT plus 3n minus 6 RT per mole. For monoatomic gas, it will become 3 by 2 RT per mole. So with this, we have finished our energies and degrees of freedom. Now we are starting with heat capacities. Specific heat capacity of a substance is defined as the amount of heat required to raise the temperature of 1 gram of a substance by 1 degree. When the substance is 1 mole, then it is called molar heat capacity. Heat capacity is a path function, so its value will differ in magnitude with a different path. We can have two heat capacities: heat capacity at constant volume Cv, heat capacity at constant pressure Cp. Now let us try and recall our thermodynamics from school days. Molar heat capacity at constant volume. Now here the absorption of heat takes place in a rigid container at constant volume. Since there is no change in volume, no external work is being done by the gas molecules. Hence, heat that is taken up by the system is used completely in increasing the kinetic energy of the gas molecules. So under these conditions, all the heat absorbed is equal to the internal energy of the system. So heat capacity at constant volume therefore is equal to del U by del T at constant volume. Now, what does it mean? It means that the heat capacity at constant volume is equal to the rate of change of internal energy with temperature at constant volume. Now, what about molar heat capacity at constant pressure? If I consider a mole of a gas enclosed in a cylinder fitted with a weightless and frictionless piston, the pressure on the piston is maintained at constant volume, usually at 1 atmospheric pressure. When the heat is supplied to the cylinder, a part of it is used in pushing the piston. That is, we are performing the pressure volume work of expansion. And the remaining part will be used in increasing the energy of the molecules, as in the case at constant volume. Thus, for an increase of temperature through 1 degree, more heat would be required. Hence, the mean molar heat capacity at constant pressure is always larger than that at constant volume. Now, therefore, this Cp is equal to del U by del T at constant pressure plus P del V by del T at constant pressure. Now, if we assume that the gas is ideal, then PV is equal to nRT, and this can be differentiated to give you P del V by del T at constant pressure is equal to nR. Now, since for an ideal gas, the internal energy U depends only on T, we will have del U by del T at constant V is equal to del U by del T at constant P. Thus, for an ideal gas, it follows that Cp is equal to Cv plus nR. For 1 mole of the gas, CPM will be equal to CVM plus R. Now we can get the value of molar heat capacity at constant volume by differentiating the molar energies with respect to temperature. We've studied about molar energies in the previous slides. Now for linear molecule, the energy was equal to 3 by 2 RT plus RT plus 3n minus 5 RT. Now if I want to get the value of CV, I will just differentiate with respect to temperature. So we get 3 by 2R plus R plus 3n minus 5R, which gives you 5 by 2R plus 3n minus 5R. For a non-linear molecule, CV is equal to 3 by 2R plus 3 by 2R plus 3n minus 6R, which is equal to 3R plus 3n minus 6R. For a monoatomic gas, this becomes equal to 3 by 2R. Now suppose I want to get the value of molar heat capacity at constant pressure. Then I will use the relation Cp is equal to Cv plus R. So for linear molecule, I will just add R to our equation for Cv. So we get Cp. Cp is equal to 5 by 2R plus 3n minus 5R plus R. Therefore we get 7 by 2R plus 3n minus 5R. For a non-linear molecule, again we are adding R to the values of Cv. So we get 3R plus 3n minus 6R plus R. So we get 4R plus 3n minus 6R. For a monoatomic gas, we are adding R to 3 by 2R. So we get 5 by 2R. There is a term that we want to define now, which is gamma. This is a ratio of Cp by Cv. Now let's see the predicted values of Cp, Cv and gamma for monoatomic, diatomic and triatomic gases. Monoatomic gas. Cv value is 3 by 2R, Cp value is 5 by 2R, and we get gamma equal to 1.667. For a diatomic gas, our equation was 3 by 2R plus R plus 3n minus 5R. We just put n equal to 2 and we get 7 by 2R. Cp will be just adding R to your Cv value, so we get 9 by 2R. And gamma is equal to 1.286. For a linear triatomic gas, you get 3 by 2R plus R plus 3n minus 5R. You just substitute 3 and you get 13 by 2R. Cp will be 15 by 2R and gamma is equal to 1.154. For a non-linear triatomic gas, this comes out to be 6R. The Cp comes out to be 7R and the gamma comes out to be 1.167. So what is the importance of this? The experimental values of Cv for a monoatomic gas is in excellent agreement with the predicted one. This value is independent of temperature over a wide range. For the polyatomic gases, the experimental values are lower than the predicted values and they are not independent of temperature. This anomaly can be attributed to the fact that the law of equipartition of energy is a law of classical physics, and these discrepancies indicate that classical mechanics is not adequate to describe the molecular properties. So with this, we wind up the module on gases. We have completely covered all the topics of gases. In the present e-lecture, we had talked about molecular collisions, collision frequency, what is the effect of temperature and pressure on the mean free path and the molecular collision. We also talked about viscosity of gases. Then we discussed law of equipartition of energy and degrees of freedom. Then used to calculate the values of heat capacities. So with this, as I have said, we have finished the topic gases, and you can just go back to your books, read up a little, look at the lectures and try and solve some numericals for you to have strong understanding of the concepts in gases. Now with this, I thank you all. Stay at home, stay safe, take care of your family and friends and parents, and bye-bye.